Hello and welcome to Code with JV AI Snapshot number 11. Bunch of news has been going on, so I've shrunk it down to a browser full. Let's jump into it. GPT-4 Vision has come out. I think in the last snapshot I was like, oh, maybe it's like, no, it was very quickly after the last video. A whole bunch of people have been playing with it. This is the system card PDF. I found it really interesting about the sort of protections they put around the model. So if you read into what OpenAI published around it, they've got a lot of information about how they've made it safe, the work they've done to have it not answer harmful questions, etc. So a bunch of it is like personal identification. Oh, that's Joe Blogs from their LinkedIn profile. They've stopped it from doing that kind of thing. They have also stopped ungrounded inference. If you ask for more information than the image can actually answer, what is this person's job is an example they use, or which of these two people is more dangerous, it will refuse to answer that. Had an extensive red team going on it. They've also done a bunch of things like you can't break captures, etc. They've published a lot of data about what's going on, which is interesting to dive into. This team of researchers, this is a big paper. It's a lot of pages in it, and they did extensive testing of what's it good at, what's it not good at. They were talking about things like you can draw circles around stuff or put labels in your image and it will be able to understand them really well. It's not very good at graphs. It's not very good at counting, those kinds of things. Here's one of count the number of apples. Couldn't do it. They tried lots of different prompts, and then down here they finally got it working with this particular prompt. I'll talk a bit later in the video about some stuff which has been happening in prompting techniques. If you want to get an idea of what GPT Vision is up for, this paper has a lot of information around it. Google Deepmind, they've been doing a bunch with robotics. They've released a big set of papers all around RT-X. The story of large language models got really good the bigger they got with their data sets. Seems to be applying in this robotic space. So instead of having a particular robot trained for folding clothes or cooking tasks, they're starting to aggregate a whole bunch of data sets for different robotic tasks, use them to train a single model, and then test how good this single model is at a wide variety of tasks. The history of AI was like models which are really good at classification or summarization or generating new things. What's happened is this transformer approach has gotten so good at lots of things, you can have a single model which you use for lots of tasks. Short version of this, I think we're going to get useful robots coming our way sooner than we might expect. I can imagine a world where we get a general purpose robotic platform where developers can start to tune it for a whole bunch of tasks quite quickly. If I think about what's happening in AI with the models we see and developers being able to, oh, you want to do job X, Y, and Z, let's get these ones and try this out. I can imagine that happening in robotics, which would be mind-blowingly exciting. New open model out, Mistral. They've got a 7B model, which is beating like the Llama 13Bs, etc. That is impressive to have the small model that competitive. There's been some controversy about using their evaluation data sets in the training data, which I haven't dug into, so double check it if you want to dive into it. But hey, new open model, which might be performant to play with. LinkedIn came out with a bunch of AI features around recruiting and learning. They've been doing a bunch of stuff for a while. In May, they had these AI-assisted messages where it's like customized messages based off a recruiter trying to talk to someone. People said they were saving about 3/4 of their time on it. I wonder if they sent 4 times the number of messages because of that. Hey, go LinkedIn recruiters. Now they've got a bunch of stuff like this is the job I'm trying to achieve. And the AI assistant coming out and giving the recruiter a whole bunch of tools to do it, which is AI tech. It's interesting. But I think the really interesting thing here is how does this play out from a competitive point of view in that how many startups were looking at learning things or looking at recruitment things where LinkedIn is going to beat them because of its established network, customers, product, etc. And they're now going to have a tough time competing. If I was in an AI startup and I was competing against established players saying, well, they're not using AI, but we are, so we're going to win. It's like, how quickly are they going to start using AI, the established players? I think in a lot of cases, we're going to see power consolidated in the hands of companies which already have it. And here's FinGPT, which is GitHub open source, but they're basically directly competing against the Bloomberg GPT. So a while back, Bloomberg spent a bunch of money saying, hey, we're going to take our Bloomberg data. But the thing is, it was only a small percentage of Bloomberg data. A lot of what they used was publicly available. They trained it, it was expensive, and this crew were like, you've got no moat. We can do it cheaper and faster and continuously. And that's what FinGPT is. So they have been comparing against Bloomberg. They've been comparing against these other ones. They're looking at how much did it cost to train them. And they're very rapidly evolving this model and these data sets so that you can start to say, I'm interested in markets X, Y, and Z. I'm going to fine tune this model on those markets. You can do it really quickly and cheaply without too much deep technical skill. My sense is that the open community is going to win in this space. Also, things like VALL-E X, which was a Microsoft research paper, text synthesis, voice cloning things. We're not going to release a model. And these other researchers are, hey, we're going to reproduce the results and train our own model. This happened with Orca as well. I think there's a bunch of times where, hey, science is being able to be reproduced. And unless a company has trade secrets or they've got data no one else can get access to, or it costs tons and tons to do things. Well, the things which cost tons and tons are generally when you're trying to do everything at once. Like if you're trying to train a Llama 2 to do general purpose foundational large language model, then yeah, it's going to cost you a bunch of money to make something like that. But if you're trying to do it in a specific subset, which is like financial information, then you can start to do it cheaper in the case of FinGPT. And here is an example of people who are reproducing it, putting it out there. And I feel like there's this interesting story of like established players, open source models getting into an interesting competitive landscape. And I think it'll be ever changing and probably different in different niches, but it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. I'm really interested in what becomes open and accessible to lots of people. Facebook have come out with Nougat, so a specific optical character recognition tool trained for academic papers. It's a small model, you can use it, you can download it. So this paper, people looked at how good is GPT-4 as a academic researcher, and the answer is, hey, people are good and GPT-4 is good and they're good at different things and bad at different things. They're good blended together. I think that idea of starting to partner together all these different papers and research things is like, well, now you can take a bunch of academic papers, you can OCR them cheaper and easier than before, you can start to do retroactive peer review on them. You can start to do a whole bunch of things. And I think that we're going to start seeing more and more impact of large language models in the field of academic research. Hey, hopefully science goes faster, right? ProPainter, they're looking at video editing. It's not perfect. Like here you can see the shadows are sort of showing up a little bit. I found that the same with the ice skater. There's still the shadows in there. So it's, a proof of concept level, but you can remove watermarks from videos. I've mentioned it in previous videos, but it's going to be more and more possible to build video editing software which goes through a video and it starts to cut out visual ads. It starts to edit the video the way you want. You could start to insert your own sports commentary from a text-to-speech model if you wanted to. All these opportunities are going to come up where you can use AI to curate content which has been hard to curate. Like you want to edit a sports video? Well, that's going to be very expensive. In the future, you can imagine where machines do that very cheaply for us. It's going to change that category completely, I think. Also, if you add the idea of there's just going to be exponentially more content created, which means if you're going to try and make a living off making whatever content, it's going to be much harder to stand out because the ability to increase content is going to increase exponentially. The types of content that can be touched by AI is increasing, but the amount of a human attention, that's going to be fairly capped, human population and wealth and whatnot. It's not like we're going to 10x the amount of human attention in our society. I think all of those things are going to dramatically change the media landscape, but I'm gunning for being able to take ads out of videos. Educators, Harvard have put out a bunch of student use cases. So here's some tips on how you can do it. You can drill down. It's a fairly good guide, but if you're interested in education, recommend this resource. Microsoft have put out a bunch of prompts for educators. It's similar sort of stuff. They're referencing a lot of Ethan Mollick's work, but you can see here's the prompts for educators they talk about. Oh, let's talk about a lesson planner. And here's a prompt that you can go, which will probably give you a good experience from the starting point. Another great resource for educators out there. This is a fascinating article where they basically started to look at prompt tuning and looked at different prompting techniques and how they performed. These are the models that they looked at. Then they started to look at the different types of prompts in there, like direct prompting. And here's the first thing step by step. So for GPT-4, they were finding things like, if you start with answer, you start to get better things. They started to say for each model, how did each prompt sort of work out? And again, you can see OpenAI at the best here, but this one here, which worked best for OpenAI, and didn't get the best performance out of Cohere, which was the rephrasing one. I feel like people who spend a lot of time on tuning prompts for models will start to have different techniques which work with the different models. I don't think there's going to be like the prompt technique to rule them all. It's going to be you choose the one for your use case, you choose the one for your model. It's going to become a more and more interesting world for people who want to get the most performance out of different models based off which models they use, which domains are they in, and which prompting strategies they're using to do it. This is chain of verification. They were talking about how do you reduce hallucinations. It's an approach where you start to get the response, but then you say, what's the plan to verify it? Execute the verification, get the final response. So a multi-prompting strategy. The ones we saw in the previous paper, they were like single prompts, just worded differently. But I think there's the prompting strategies as well, where you start to have multiple prompts, but also multiple models, possibly bouncing ideas. So it's not as good from a latency point of view, like it takes ages to run compared to a single prompt. It's also more expensive to run. And when would you start to deploy this strategy versus the how do I word my prompt type thing? There's multiple tools coming out for people who are just like, I'm trying to achieve a goal. OpenCopilot. How can you start to put a Copilot into any SaaS product out there? which is interesting. Here's a little help bubble down here. How can we help with that? So those kinds of features, been around for a while, but how do you upload your APIs so that those little features not only can talk to you or point you to help docs, but they can start to execute tasks for you in your app? Hey, delete my old listings, upload a new pet, etc., where you can go through wizard type or text-based interactions in natural language and have the AI execute and change the state of the code. And so it's early stage, hot off the press. That's it for this week. Oh, you made it to the end and you're watching the final summary. Thank you. I hope you get value from these. I love making them. Codewithjv.com/snapshot is where you can sign up for the email newsletter. I'll put a bunch more analysis and thoughts in there. Hey, have fun out there. Build some beautiful things.